Most VCs, I would hope, are super on board with the Elon Musk options, right?
Most of them are not, I
Really?
would say. Yeah. And again, I think that's where they're adding negative value.
The magnitude and significance of spying in Silicon Valley and venture in particular is like probably way higher than we anticipate.
But you're saying venture capital firms will have actual spies. There was a rumor when, this is prior to LinkedIn selling to Microsoft, and he would have like the God view of LinkedIn and he would know what was going on.
Oh my gosh, that's
and then
amazing.
he would personally use that to make his own angel investment. Like a lot of these companies have great data and they could use that to make really good investments. Hello, fellow dirty nerds. My guest today is Mario Gabriele. Mario is the founder of the Generalist, which is a tech analysis substack with over 132,000 subscribers. Mario also runs Generalist Capital, which invests in early stage companies. Mario, welcome to World of DAS.
Thanks so much for having me.
Really excited. Now, you wrote this great article I really liked about VC soft power. Like, how does that work right now, and how is that evolving?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you know this much better than I do, but sort of soft power term comes from Joseph Nye and is usually applied to sort of the political realm for discussions about power that is based on influence.
Like Hollywood is America's soft power or something like that, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. K-pop would be Korea's soft power.
A perfect example. And VC is such an interesting space in the sense that there was really no need for soft power when it started because there was, plentiful entrepreneurs in theory and very few capitalists. But now that it's gotten so competitive, the need to have a story, a brand, has become, essential. And so I think some of the things you're seeing happen at the moment is, VCs taking storytelling, media extremely seriously. And you can see that with, the Andreessens of the world, but also, smaller firms too.
Some of them have their own news outlet even.
Yeah, exactly. Future, the A16Z outlet didn't ultimately last, but sort of the lessons of that experiment feel like they very much were pushed into the firm in the sense that, they have a bunch of different podcast shows. Their, partners are releasing books. The sort of narratives that they put into the market around American dynamism or it's time to build are really shaping the way that founders and other VCs spend their time and attention and capital.
Yeah. I mean, even think of like Hacker News, which was like kind of like the Y Combinator aggregator of news or something like that. And then because these VCs are essentially, their money is not a great differentiator. Money is a commodity, so they have to differentiate in some other way. And what are the, besides for just like doing some podcasts or something, like what are the other ways you see these VCs differentiating themselves?
Yeah, I think just trying to do a podcast or, the sort of worst possible version of it is the sort of Medium blog post. I'm thrilled to announce our investment in XYZ.
Yeah. Yep.
And that doesn't create any soft power. It almost like signals the opposite. It signals sort of a lack of creativity and thinking. But I do think the best version of it is probably what A16Z does, which is, constant, solid media that is thoughtful and really aimed at the audience of entrepreneurs and other investors, and then these like massive sort of super stories that they're telling throughout these different ways, whether it's the little tech agenda.
To push back a bit, I mean, A16Z has like hundreds of people in its like PR department, essentially, or at least like they probably have at least 100 kind of both like internal and external people to help them do it. They have Mark, who's just like extremely famous person who can put things, and also a brilliant person who can put things out in the ether. Most VC firms, even extremely successful VC firms, don't have anything equivalent to that. So what can they, like, it would be hard to copy that thing if you're not A16Z, I would presume, right?
Yeah, I think, well, yes, there is like a genius of phrase that Mark Andreessen has that I think is like, extremely hard to replicate.
Yes. Yeah.
And that can't be done super easily. But I do think you see other firms like find ways of doing this interestingly, so I think what Logan Bartlett has done with Redpoint, like totally different sort of sensibilities, much more playful, but has built a really like thriving podcast that has built his brand and the firm's brand. And so I do think like as long as you
By the way,
take
like
a
this is so interesting. I've never even heard of him
oh
before.
really
So until right now,
yeah
yeah. So that's like great. I'm gonna go check him out. But I actually never heard his name before until today.
Okay, so he,
Yeah.
had an interesting trajectory with sort of soft power in the sense that, like, he was a very funny Twitter account for a while, and sort of initially built a podcast, sort of riffing on that more humor, banter based podcast, and has now more, leaned into really great interviews, things like that.
Oh, cool. I'll check
And
it out.
so, yeah, I think it's an interesting one.
I mean, you'd also wrote about this like potentially this VC mass extinction event, and you wrote this thing called Mullet Capitalism. Like, what's going on there, and what firms do you think are under the biggest threat?
Oh, there was some interesting discussion in the summer. I think it was on the back of some data that maybe Sapphire Ventures released, or maybe it was from Carta, basically showing that since the bubble burst in uh, you know 2022 and late 2021, uh, so much of the LP capital has basically concentrated in a very very small number of names.
Yep.
Basically, meaning that unless you are Sequoia Founders Fund, Andreessen, whoever. It's really hard to raise capital. And so
their funds are getting much bigger and other funds are suffering because of it.
right, exactly. And so there was a lot of discussion around like, is this sort of the death or the mass culling of these insurgent managers and sort of these mid-sized managers? And that does seem to be happening. I think the folks that are most under pressure are the ones who have sort of delivered middling returns without a clear perspective.
Yep.
I think the need to be opinionated is probably stronger than ever.
Yeah, either you have to have great returns or you have to have extremely strong opinions about the future, right?
Yes.
You can't have
Yes.
neither of those.
Yeah, and for a while that was not necessarily totally mandatory. You could sort of pick a rough space and put a flag out, put a flag in the sand and say, this is what we're going to do. And that was promising enough. But yeah, now the dynamics are super different.
And there are more, or why are there not more traditional kind of other businesses that maybe have like access to proprietary data or access to startups, like getting into the investing world? Like I've always thought it'd be great to have like Plaid Capital or Stripe Capital or Ramp Capital, and a lot of them have that for like lending.
Yes.
Where they lend to but they don't have it for doing equity investments in their businesses.
Yeah, so I'm realizing I didn't really answer some of the previous question, which was this idea of the mullet capitalist, which is a traditional business in the front and venture in the back. And so Stripe Capital or Plaid Capital, those would be like the supercharged version of that.
Version, right?
Yeah, with
right.
like the best possible businesses in the front and venture in the back. I think functionally, a lot of them do it, right? Like Stripe makes a ton of investments,
and certainly the founders do, right?
Yeah,
and then maybe they're using the data. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I sort of suspect maybe not, but
I suspect not too.
Yeah. I don't know. I would guess that they feel like they have more than enough on their plate, and that's they can do enough of this personally or through sort of associated funds. I mean, I think Zach from Plaid has sort of a second fund to the side, and maybe that's the way that they feel comfortable doing it.
There was a rumor when this is prior to LinkedIn selling to Microsoft that Jeff Weiner would just go in and he would have like the God view of LinkedIn and he would know what was going on.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And then he would personally use that to make his own angel investments. And I don't know if that rumor is true or not, but there was a rumor for a while. And so you can imagine like a lot of these companies have great data and they could use that to make really good investments. If you're enjoying this podcast, please sign up for our newsletter. Go to worldofdas.com. The link is in the description below. Now back to the video. Or something like that.
Yeah. That would have been pretty amazing.
Yeah, and by the way, a lot of people do mine like that data is mineable. So people mine Twitter and LinkedIn and other types of things. Who's talking to who's and based on that, I want to talk to these companies. So that is going on today, and but maybe not from like the inside of these companies.
Yes, totally. I had a friend, a venture capitalist friend, who a few years ago, as an experiment, set up uh, a fake LinkedIn account, X, Google, Uber, Stripe, and just waited to see how long it would take until this person, from the moment they put, something new or stealth on their
Yeah.
profile, like who sort of is automatically in the DMs, and they were like, it's almost instant as soon as it becomes, as soon
Oh,
as you flip
interesting.
that switch.
Interesting. So they basically create a honeypot for VCs because I've heard of companies doing that for like recruiters to see like what recruiters are trying to recruit into their engineers and stuff.
Oh, that's clever.
With all create, oh yeah, ex Google, graduated from MIT type of person. But that this is like a more advanced version to figure out like what of your VC competitors and how are they pitching these people.
Yeah, totally. Honeypot's the exact right word for it. Yeah, it was a very compelling stock photo and CV that made you think, oh, this guy's going to build something fantastic.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. That I love that. That's now you had at one of your pieces you quoted Vinod Khosla as saying that 70-80% of VCs just add negative value, don't add zero value, but actually take away value. First of all, like let's unpack that. Like, do you believe that? Do you think that's true? And then we can talk about like, okay, how they could add more value.
Honestly, the first time I heard that, I was sort of like, that can't possibly be true. Um, but I'm sort of embarrassed to say that the more time I spend with companies and see sort of the dynamics that they go through, the more I think that really might be true, and it's maybe not that much of an exaggeration. And I don't think it's necessarily from like ill intentions. I think it's
Yeah.
just probably a mix of uh, people maybe overextending themselves, whether with time or their own opinions or whatever it is. But I think like it is really hard to actually add value, and sometimes just doing nothing puts you ahead of a lot of folks.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is very hard as someone who served on boards before, and I don't like being on boards, mainly because I don't feel like I can help
Mm.
because you just don't know that much about the
Yeah.
company. Maybe you
Yeah.
can help in the very big thing. I assume like if a company's going through a fundraising or an M&A event or something like that, where the VC has seen this so many times, they could add a lot of value. But your company strategy, your product strategy, it's such a snowflake. I do think it's almost unfair to expect your board to add a ton of value. And I guess really what you want is them to add no value rather than negative value, right? So
Yes. Where would you put your number? Like, do you think Vinod is roughly right?
I don't know. Maybe I don't think it's that high a negative, but I do think very few add real value.
Yeah.
Like the few times I've been on the board, like the main thing I've been, first of all, often it's like it's either going very well or going not well. In
Mm-hmm.
both cases, I don't know how much you can have. When it's going very well, like literally you just have these meetings, you're like, everything is great. You guys
Thumbs
are
up.
awesome. Right. Yeah. And so, and if it's not going well, like it's not like you can fix it. And I'd say some of the cases I've been on the board, like the main thing I'm arguing for is to like give the CEO more comp.
Mm.
I'm like arguing with the other. Sometimes these venture capitalists, I think they think it's like the CEO, like, oh yeah, they may have a big slunk of equity, but it's already vested. So their go
Yes.
forward equity is often, and their go forward comp is often significantly below what it would cost to bring in an outside CEO.
That's
By
really
below, it might
interesting.
even be like 10% of what an outside CEO would be getting. And often I'd be arguing, okay, maybe it shouldn't be 100%, but should it be 80%? Should it be
Yeah. Yeah.
70%? And so that's often, so when the closed door session after the CEO leaves, I said the number one thing that I've done on boards is like try to get more comp for my CEOs, which is a
Wow.
very odd thing. So I don't know if I'm really adding that much. I'm adding value to the CEO. Clearly, I don't know how much value I'm adding to the company, right? In
Well, I
that
mean,
case, but
keeping them in place and motivated,
yeah.
I'm sure, is
So
important, right?
exactly, and if they're just like if they're that much more, the argument, of course, against is, well, they're not going to leave.
Hmm.
Even if we didn't pay them anything, they're not going to leave. And I think, yes, that's true. But now they're going to be like so much more motivated, so much more excited,
Yeah.
so much. And just like, yeah, getting that person 10% more excited, that could double our outcome.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And
When you're so
so,
leveraged on that one
exactly,
person.
so leveraged on that one person. And I would say that is the area where VCs will know that they'll know this person is
Hmm.
so important, but then they won't try to incent that person more in any way. And
Yeah.
so pound foolish. It's like giving this person, let's say, 2% more of the company
Yeah.
is not is if you could like double your outcome. It's so much better for all the shareholders. Yet the VCs are like, I'm not going to get diluted another 2% by this
Mm.
person already owns they already own 30% of the company,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you sort of just expect them to do it for pure love of the game, and as little
Yeah,
as you can
and by the
give
way,
them as a
which
result.
so
Yeah,
much do, so many
for
people
sure. That's sort
do,
of
but
table stakes, right?
yeah, and then they'll go off and like they'll be an advisor at some other company, and then the VCs will start complaining. Well, why is this person
Mm.
going to be advised? It's like we
Oh,
just
that's so
decided not
interesting.
to. We just told them they weren't valuable.
Yeah,
Right?
totally.
Like and then so that's been my main thing when I've been on the boards, which is I don't know how much. Maybe that is adding a lot of value, but the
I
rest
would.
of it, you have to have
Yeah, that
humility
feels
to
very
say like I
concrete.
can't really help the company do its job.
Yeah, just like getting to a sense of uh, deep reality with a company is. I mean, it takes years and years and years, and anything you're going to say, presumably 99% of the time, the CEO has thought of it and ruled it out for
Yeah,
XYZ reasons, right?
and a lot of these VCs, they're on 15 boards.
Mm.
I mean, how much can you really know about any given company? It's hard.
Yeah, yeah, that seems like it would be a really terrible way to spend a year. Is
Oh
doing
yeah,
15
totally.
boards.
By the being boards like the being on a board is the most boring thing. Um,
I've only ever been told never do it.
It's terrible. It's
Yeah,
so boring. It's also boring for the CEO to be at like have these board like they're just
yeah.
the process of creating on the board deck. I think is a very good thing to go
Mm.
do, but often the meetings themselves, and maybe I just haven't been to great ones, including the ones I've won myself, or never been that good. They're just not. I don't know that that many people are getting much value out of them.
I suspect that is very universal based on what I've heard. I doubt there's some unbelievable board meetings happening that we're missing out on, but maybe
You know,
very rarely.
at Meta, obviously have the traditional board,
Hmm.
which is the the governance board, which is obviously very important when you're a public company. It's even more important. But they also have a product board. Now,
Hmm.
some of the board members are on both. So there are people who are on the product board, and the product board is super deep on the product, doing like product reviews. And so some of the people like Drew Houston and I think Charlie Songer, some of these guys who are on the Meta board are also on the product board. But that to me is a very interesting thing. And that
Yeah.
is like quite strategic. But the people on that board are people who have like deep product
Mm.
experience
Yes.
and not like necessarily the governance person who you also might need on like the main board.
Yeah. It sounds like that would be a very, very different dynamic.
Correct. Yeah. And maybe it'd be interesting to talk to the CEO of Meta, but maybe Zuck gets more value out of the
Mm.
product board than he does get out of the traditional board of directors, which you just need to run a company.
Yeah. Presumably he gets something out of it. Otherwise, why bother, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is. You have to have
You
one.
have to have a product board?
No, sorry. You're right. So the product board, he's
Yeah.
getting something out for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
The other board, I mean, yes, exactly. I would presume he wouldn't be doing it unless he's getting personal value out of it.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Now, is there anything if you were advising VCs to be better at adding value? Like, what would you advise? Is there things to do or things to not do?
The things that I hear most from founders, and that's sort of, I think the best indication is really they end up being like very simple things. And so I think, the number one sort of request or thing that I hear from founders is just like a level of responsivity and generosity with one's network. Sort of being really genuinely open to seeing a message, responding quickly with a tangible thing that you might be able to do, and being willing to expend social capital in doing that. And
I would have thought that would be something that most VCs do very well.
From what
Like
I would
it's
have
kind of
assumed so
reactive.
too.
So again, it's on the CEO to use them effectively. And I think
Mm-hmm.
most CEOs, including myself, are guilty of not using their investors, not asking them to do things. But I think once asked, I would imagine most investors will do it
I think there's
and do it quickly.
a version of it where if you don't know how to make the ask, and if it's a really vague ask, it's sort of incumbent on the investor to try and do a little bit of searching to say like, hey, we're trying to meet people who are in this sector, in this
Yeah.
role. Like if you say, hey, I see you're, connected to this person on LinkedIn. Do you know them yet? Yes or no? Like maybe that gets a fast reaction.
Yeah.
But from a lot of founders, from what I hear, it's sort of like maybe that in between style intro that doesn't get as much of a response, or things like monthly updates that doesn't get often a response or much of a response. And so I think it's just like a lot of those little things that can make a difference. But also, I'm very early in charting this for myself, so I'm sure there are a bunch of missteps that I'm making, and that in 10 years time someone will say, I can't believe you didn't do this or that.
The negative things I've seen is just like asking the CEO or asking other people in the company to do things that have low value. And let's put together this 3-year plan. Let's do these types of things. And then it's like they're expending all this energy.
Yeah.
Like you have to realize there's this ripple effect every time you ask for something.
Yes.
And then, and sometimes those things just like they keep producing that thing for years, even though like maybe you just needed it that one time, right? So, but it's true when you're a CEO. Sometimes you have to be very careful what you ask for in an organization. The board member would have a similar kind of responsibility to be gentle about what they're requesting.
The other thing I've heard, and curious if it's the same for you as a founder, is that like the most annoying text you can get from an investor is saying like, hey, did you see this thing that your competitor is doing? Or did you see this new competitor? And that's like the one thing that is sure to piss everyone off and ruin their day.
Interesting. I don't mind getting that.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, often I will know 90% of the time I get those things. I'm well aware of that thing. Sometimes they're not even a competitor, they're our customer or something, and they're just kind of in a similar space or, whatever. But every once in a while, it's like, oh, I haven't heard of this. This is interesting, or this is adjacent, or so I guess if you get something that's you just disregard, it's not, I guess you have to reply. Oh yeah, I know about this guy.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah. But it sounds like, you're happy for the, crowdsourced competitive intelligence.
I do think that is at least shows that they care. And I think that is important. That that you want to know that your investors care about you and they're thinking about you. And so I generally think that's not a bad, not terrible thing.
What's the most useful thing an investor has done for you guys?
It's a good question. I mean, sometimes they can help you not do something stupid.
That's really valuable.
Yeah. Or just the fact or maybe not even help, but just like having another person to talk it through is helpful. So we want to acquire this company. Okay, let's talk it through. And then, you start to realize through talking it through that, okay, it's going to take us down this other path. And then it's going to take all of your time, and then you're not going to be able to spend time on your product. And, You have to integrate these two different cultures, and maybe it's a good decision, maybe it's not, but they can help you think through it in a way. If they come in just right off the bat saying that's a bad idea, then might not be the best way of doing it. But if they just kind of like, if they're a thought partner, then I think it could be helpful.
Yeah, that is one that a bunch of folks, through this process of writing these guides, say a lot, is just like, being a mirror to someone in those moments is really valuable.
Yeah. It's hard when you're on someone's board, you're also technically their boss. There are, like, when I'm an investor right now, I try never to be on the board because I don't want them to have that perception. I want them to call for like advice or help, or they're having an issue that maybe they don't feel comfortable going to their board members, or maybe it's a co-founder issue, or some other type of issue that they don't want to talk to their board members or comp. I talk to a lot of people about comp. It's very common, by the way.
Really?
CEO comp complaints are extremely common and very hard to have a conversation with really anyone. You can't have a conversation with anyone in your company about.
Yeah.
But often people feel like they're under comped. And often after talking to them, I agree with them.
When does that start cropping up? Like
usually like 4 years in.
Oh, yeah. 4 years in. Yeah.
So usually right when you hit the 4-year mark, 5-year mark, depending on your vesting schedule, you're all of a sudden like, my go forward comp. Now, a lot of these CEOs your second time CEOs are often paying them nothing. So they're getting zero salary. Second time CEOs are, or they're getting very reduced. Even the first time CEOs, they're getting, they're one of the lowest paid people in the whole company often in terms of salary. So they're often can't even, they have like 6 roommates or so. These guys are like 5 years into a company. The company is on paper is nominally successful, yet they're still barely able to get things moving.
Yes, totally. That's really interesting. I hadn't considered how common that must be.
Yes, it is much more common, and of course they'll feel like, okay, I can't talk to my board about it, or I can't. So there's a gripe session, but then there might even be some way. Okay, let's strategize about what we can do about it. Maybe there are ways we can do it. Maybe there's a ways to get the board on. Maybe there are ways you can think about it. I'm a big fan of like out of the money options as well. So this is like the Elon Musk, what he did at Tesla. Can you do like, that's another way of aligning people. So there are other ways of doing some things.
Yeah, I feel like most VCs, I would hope, are super on board with the Elon Musk options, right?
Most of them are not, I would say. Yeah. And again, I think that's where they're adding negative value, but most of them are, at least in my experience, it is a lot of convincing, a lot of, because it's dilutive. Even in the best case, it's dilutive. Of course, the best case is the one that they're hoping for. So it becomes this like harder thing and so you have to make the case that yes, it's dilutive, but it's actually like it motivates the CEO more and all these other things. And it's more likelihood that we'll be more successful, which is a hard argument to make. I don't even know if it's true or not. So it's a hard argument to make. So you have to, but that's the argument that you have to kind of do.
I would have thought that one would be an easier one to get across the line.
Now you built the Generalist, and it's kind of as a media company, but then so you got the Mullet in the back being an investment company as well. What have you learned about that kind of advantages and disadvantages of that kind of Mullet capitalism?
Yeah, I really like this model that feels like it's happening in a few different shapes. The media one is definitely one you see with the Acquired Guys and Packy from Not Boring and Harry Stebbings, and then you have some other flavors that are emerging, which I think is really exciting.
What are some other good flavors that you admire?
So there's the Canon Project, which I think is a really interesting one. That's
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it until relatively recently, but basically a sort of recruiting business for tech companies that focuses, it seems, on like sort of the most promising elite college graduates or early, folks early in their career, getting them into tech companies. And then also there's a 20 million fund. And so, having access to that pool of talent is obviously a really nice competitive advantage. And then there's another one that's sort of earlier in its life called Super Connector, where they've built sort of an interesting outsourced sales network
Mm.
that the manager initially started using to help his portfolio companies, but is now spinning out into a standalone business. And so I think there's like an interesting synergy there, where it's like you can imagine the sales network being a really really solid, great business, but also being this sort of unique value add that, especially if you're not trying to be play in the multi-billion-dollar AUM club, like you
Yep.
can win really meaningful stakes there.
Because you're a
And so
solo capitalist, right?
that's right. Yeah, just me. And it's a $15 million fund, like very concentrated approach. So roughly 15 companies. And the idea is to help the founders of those companies with storytelling, and to sort of a secondary effect network, just because the Generalist does have a relatively broad reach.
And um, there are quite a lot of these funds that are like, let's say, $5 to $20 million funds. Often it's like a side thing. It's like a side hustle. They might even be a current CEO of a tech company. They may have other, like you, they may be running a media company. There may be other. How do you think we'll see more of those in the future? Fewer of those? Like, how do you think those will be evolving?
I think we'll probably see fewer in the short term, in the sense that, I do think that sort of flight to brand names is real.
Yeah.
And I could see that persisting. I think that, like, if there's a really differentiated perspective and you're someone who has a strong network, raising a $5 million fund as a CEO of a successful company is like not so hard, right? It's
Right.
more just a
Right.
question of
Not
focus.
hard at all. Yeah.
And so I think there will be some of those folks, but on the margin, I'd say probably less. I do like the media flavor, because I think there are some really sort of nice overlaps that work together quite nicely. There are definitely drawbacks also, but yeah, I can't imagine we'll see tons more given the current environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I'm not sure where I would predict
And
on
maybe
that.
my answer was
Yeah.
a good illustration that I'm not really sure either.
Yeah.
I'm sort of like,
Yeah, I
probably
could see
less,
both. I
but
could see both arguments for it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it plays out, because it is easier to go do, and you could see even like these big mega funds almost funding
yeah,
all these little guys.
yeah,
If you think of like Millennium, which is a huge hedge fund, Millennium is really just in some ways just a collection of all these individual PMs,
huh,
each one of which has, let's say, somewhere between 50 to 300 million, in a pod, and they're almost the back office, like
that is so
reallocating
interesting.
risk, understanding some things, making sure. Sometimes they'll double down on the trade that the person is making and stuff. You can imagine like a huge manager like an Andreessen all of a sudden just having like all
Yes,
these other like pods that are out there, and somehow they interact, and somehow they don't.
yeah, totally. I mean, Andreessen does seem to be sort of institutionalizing its fund to funds practice more, from what I can tell. So maybe that's part of it. Obviously, Mark and Chris Dixon are like very prolific LPs in a lot
Yes.
of
Yep.
funds.
Yep.
So
They're in
yeah,
flex. They're LPs in Flex Capital. Yep. Yep. Yep.
and Generalist Capital. So there you go.
Yeah.
We're two
Yeah.
for
So there you
two
go.
on
Yeah.
this call.
Exactly. Yeah.
um,
Now, how do you think about exits? So Amazon went public. When they went public, I think 2 years in. Today's companies are taking at least often 10 years before they go public. Some companies like Stripe, I don't even know if they'll ever go public. Like, it's just, who
yeah,
knows? Like, where do you see some of these kind of like second order effects of this timeline change?
yeah. I mean, I can't remember exactly what Palantir was. Was it 17, 20, something like that? It,
Yeah, it was a while. Yeah.
yeah, a long, long time. I think the clearest sort of effect of it is just the what some folks will call the private equitization of venture, where there is sort of more of this booming secondaries market.
Yep.
You can see sort of the rise of players like Industry Ventures, which started as this sort of secondaries focused fund and has become, I think, a really important part of the ecosystem. And so I think the interesting things that happen as a result of that is like, maybe more of a bifurcation between like true seed early stage investors who are, because they have enough certainty in being able to sell secondaries, sort of able to underwrite again towards like a 10-year timeline. And then, the other side of that schism are the really long-term growth folks who take it for the second decade.
Yeah.
And so that I think is something that we'll only see more of over the coming.
And you think some more
10+
seed
years.
companies will like, okay, I'm going to take 50% of my chips off the table, or that type of thing?
Yeah, I think there are sort of two ways to play it, right? Like either you stay pure early stage and you get comfortable and like build sort of muscle memory and institutional knowledge around how to do those secondary sales as just like part of the model.
Yeah.
Or I think you go the route of a lot of these mega firms and sort of like vertically integrate as much as you possibly can, and prepare yourself to also hold maybe in the public markets and so on and so forth. And so I think that's a different way to do it too. But if you're not blessed with those kind of resources, I think probably you'll have to find ways to build that liquidity in.
Yeah, certainly. When companies back in the day, when a company, if you're a seed investor or a investor, and the company went public, at that point you'd usually distribute the shares, but distribute it to your LPs.
Yeah,
and often there was still a huge ride up from there. Now that companies are going public later, you could imagine like a big event where it's like a PE style event when the company's worth $5-10 billion or something, and you may decide to distribute some of that to your LPs, give them some cash back or something.
Yeah, totally. There's some like, interesting strip sales, where folks will sort of sell a tranche of the entire portfolio to folks. And that's like an interesting way. I've seen some managers sort of lock in a certain floor for how well the fund does and give some money back to LPs while still.
Sorry, I'm not familiar. How does that work?
It's called a strip sale. And so, there's a fund called Blackbird, which is an Australian fund. Incredible performance. Like, they share it all on their website. I think their first fund is a 30x plus.
Holy mackerel. Wow.
And a big part of that was finding Canva early and then like aggressively doubling, tripling, quadrupling down. Like they really built a huge position. And so I don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point in that fund's lifetime, the manager, Nikki, was approached by Stepstone, who said like, hey, we want to basically buy 1% of the whole portfolio, which is a strip sale. And it allowed him to essentially like realize 3x in returns.
Mm-hmm.
And LPs had the chance to sort of take some of that off the table, but also keep some of it riding. And so Stepstone ended up having like, a chunk of a firm that ended up, growing a great deal still because Canva has continued to appreciate, and the other companies.
So in some ways, it's just like a secondary where,
it's like
if you're an employee at a hot company or something like that, you could sell a portion of your shares or something like that to go, lock in something or buy a house or whatever it might be.
Yeah, the nice part for the GP is that you're not only trimming your best position. Like instead of just selling Canva, you sell a little of everything.
Yeah, you're selling a secondary in the whole fund. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. That's cool.
I think it's like a nice way to do it, honestly.
Now you write also a lot about politics and how do you see this, like, where by the time this comes out, we'll have a new president. There's all this talk about DOGE and Department of Government Efficiency. How do you see that kind of evolving over time?
Wow. I think it'll be absolute theater for the next 4 years. We were going to see, I think, some astonishing stories. And I'm kind of quietly optimistic about DOGE and what might happen over the next 4 years. I think there's lots of ways it could go wrong, and might end up.
If nothing happens, what's the best explanation of what did go wrong?
I think the best
just
explanation,
like entrenchment, like
I sort of think more just like ego cataclysms. There's a lot of
Okay.
big personalities there, and I think there will be at some point differences of opinion and philosophies, maybe within DOGE, but also between DOGE and the administration. And I'm not sure how that resolves itself. And if they manage to avoid that, I could see some like incredible things happening, and the amount of talent that they're pulling in seems to be no small feat. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that there are tons of low hanging fruit that like really intelligent, tech minded people can bring to the table. My big hope is that uh, DOGE invites an amazing writer in for the full 2 year period and
Mm.
lets them chronicle this,
Mhm.
because either it's going to
Rhymes with
be
Mario.
honestly, there's probably like 1,000 people that would do it better than me, but someone should do it.
Uh-huh.
Um, because either it's going to work, in which case it's a case study for like every nation on earth,
Yeah.
every Western nation of how to do this, or it doesn't, and we'll, learn something really important from it. But I almost feel like there's a civic responsibility to have that story told, because it's like the biggest case study of all time.
Interesting. That's great. I have
It'll
a
never
few.
happen, but
Well, no, I don't know. I actually think it could happen. I like
you
that.
think
I like
so?
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
feel
hope
like that
so.
could happen. What's a commonly held belief in tech do you think will look like somewhat absurd like 10 years from now?
Mm. Um, I've come to believe that the sort of long-term optimism around VR / the metaverse is like something that we may just more or less entirely navigate away from. Um, like there are some people who sincerely sort of are excited about the idea of living in a Ready Player One
Yeah,
simulation, and I think that's probably quite misguided. And I'm sort of optimistic that we're going to navigate away from that threat of computing, except for use cases in which immersion is really magical, and maybe that's some fraction of gaming or something like that. But yeah, that sort of idea in general, I'm not convinced about at all.
it's literally like 10 years ago. Like the two things most people were talking about were self-driving cars and VR.
Yeah.
And I had thought at the time that if I had to make a bet, I would bet that VR, like 10 years later, VR would be ubiquitous and self-driving cars, we just wouldn't be able to get there. And
Mm,
it seems almost the opposite has happened. Like it just not that really that many people I know spend time in like real VR.
yeah.
Um, but we're already making like a significant progress on the self-driving car front.
Yeah, it seems like in SF it's, I mean, pretty close to ubiquitous.
Yeah, I mean, I was just in San Francisco a couple days ago, and I made sure to only do the Waymos, and it was absolutely lovely.
Oh, that's awesome. I still haven't ridden in one. So
Oh,
my
really?
next
Oh, we
trip,
have to.
I'm
Okay,
really
we have
excited.
to. It's incredible. It's an incredible experience. Like just from even just the UI of unlocking the door and getting in, and then saying hello, Mario, welcome, and just like
Oh,
the
wow.
whole thing is just
Mm,
so well done. Many of which you could even be doing it with the driver, but they've kind of figured out
yeah.
a really good UI around it and just experience. And then the car itself is just absolutely beautiful.
Mm.
It's one of the most beautiful cars I've ever been in. Just the car, and obviously you could just have
Really?
that car and drive it, but
Uh,
it's a gorgeous, gorgeous car, and just it feels luxurious just being in that car.
wow.
Way more so than typical Uber Black that you're in, and
Hmm.
just it feels way better in almost every dimension.
Wow. I hope to get to SF this quarter at some point. So I will have to try and
Yeah,
get in one.
it's the future. Is there a contrarian view you hold about how to build great companies?
I've been, as sort of a little mini project, going back to lots of the books about the best known founders of our era. So, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs, and just trying to like actually figure out what did they tangibly do. Like, we hear
Yep.
so much You could read many a Harvard Business Review about like what good management looks like, but when you actually study it, it strikes me that so much of it is basically the entire opposite of what is heralded to be good
Yeah.
management.
Yeah.
And the one that comes up so often is just like the degree of micromanagement from these people.
Yeah. So
Like,
high.
yeah, it's so high, and it must be like really difficult if you're someone who isn't willing to have that level of input all the time. But it feels like you just have to, yeah. That so my contrarian opinion would be really just like to build an insanely massive company. Much of the time depends on just an atrocious, persistent level of micromanagement to which
By the way, that seems almost, that seems the opposite of contrarian today. I feel like almost everyone's bought into that.
you
I
think
could be
so.
wrong. I don't know that many people do it,
Mm,
but nowadays it doesn't seem contrarian at all to believe that. I
to
could be
believe,
wrong though. Yeah.
yeah, maybe that's right.
Yeah.
To the extent that it feels strange to me that if it's accepted that it's not practiced.
I think it's very hard to do
Just because it's
because
from a personal perspective.
I think it's both interpersonally tough to do. And also, a lot of people you hire won't like it, so they'll quit. And then, so you might not like that. You have to be okay with having some more interpersonal strife there. And then you have to get involved in all the details. And a lot of people like to be, I'm strategic.
Mm,
Right. It turns out they have to be involved in these very, very, very little details out there.
yes.
And it turns out like the strategic part comes from being involved in the details and not the other way around. But a
Mm,
lot of founders, they just want to be more strategic and they don't want to be involved in all this crap.
mm.
Right. They want to
Yeah,
do the fun stuff.
it's painful to be doing
Yeah.
that all
Yeah.
the
You have to
time.
be like reading deep in the specs and you have to be
Hmm.
you have to be QAing things. And it's a different type of thing. I mean, I don't know how Jensen Huang has done it for so long. The guy's been the
Yeah.
CEO longer than anybody.
Yeah.
Usually there's a half-life to being able to do it.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's interesting. Then I'm going to have to update my priors on that and think of what's more off piste.
Um, do you think there's a big technology or innovation that's just like significantly underrated right now, that will really have an opportunity to really reshape society, but most people don't appreciate it?
Uh, well, this is being talked about a lot because of the bridge acquisition that Stripe made, but I continue to think stablecoins are extremely interesting, and even despite the current hype, probably underappreciated by just how radical that is for the broader world.
Why do you need a lot of stable? Like, is it okay if we just had like one stable coin or two stable coin? Like, why do you need more than that?
I think there are probably
Or you
interesting
might need
properties
stable coins
that'll.
for each. Okay, I need a stable coin for the euro and a stable coin for the dollar and a stable coin for the renminbi or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and you'll probably have, there are versions that have different sort of yield profiles and stuff like
Hmm.
that. It wouldn't surprise me if, like, I don't know, there's a proliferation and then some degree
Yeah.
of culling towards a few, major players. But I'm a investor in a company called Dollar App that I remain just obsessed with because, it's just essentially a neobank built on stablecoin rails that has um, allowed so much of Latin America to escape the cycle of insane inflation, that Argentina in particular was in pre-Millet, and that sort of like dynamic, I think, is just like really interesting. And then the other thing that feels, so radical in sci-fi, and we are all aware of it, but I don't know if we totally understand where it's going yet, is BCI, like brain computer interfaces, both in the like extreme Neuralink version,
Yeah.
and in sort of, lighter weight versions that, sit on your temple or behind your ear, and that might sort of modulate your focus or,
Yeah.
direct your attention differently, things like that. So that's another thing that I think I'm excited to see what happens there.
Yeah. That could be, or just things that help. There's got to be these somewhat interfaces in some ways, like this is a brain interface, right? You have a
Yeah.
phone, and it's almost like interacting. It's helping you recall things,
Yeah.
right, that you wouldn't normally recall. But it's not the best form factor. Like if I forget, your last name, okay, do I go and search for, Mario the writer or something, and just kind of
Yeah.
like I said, somehow it needs to have a better way of interacting with my brain to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's like this idea that I wrote about, and it's sort of half an idea really. It's just like, what does the better body for AI look like? Because it doesn't feel like the perfect form factor for AI is the phone per se. I thought Humane was an interesting attempt.
Yeah.
I like the look of Rabbit, Friend, all these different things. I think are interesting experiments in that space, and maybe the closer you actually get to the human brain, the sort of more interesting that becomes.
Yeah, there is this idea. I mean, the idea of the Google Glass
Yeah.
is so appealing
Mm-hmm.
and so exciting to imagine. You would be able to have an instant recall on someone's face, and you'd have some other, or instant directions and other types of things. Like, and in some ways, like some people will say, "Oh, this is terrible for social interaction." But
Mm-hmm.
today, when you're looking down at your
Yeah.
device,
Yeah.
it's
Totally.
very, at least you'll be present, and you'll almost
Mm-hmm.
just have this heads up display while you're present about it. It doesn't. It seems like, I'm like you, a little bit short on VR, but AR could just be world changing.
Yes, if you can figure that out well, it feels like having a digital layer on top of everything. You can see so many use cases for that. I sort of, frankly, part of that bums me out a little bit. I think it will happen, and I think I'll probably end up loving it. But I do
Yeah,
sort of that the piece of uh, having your reality mediated by that
that's
uh,
right.
is is sort of bizarre, but will cease to be bizarre in a long enough
Yeah,
time.
because like all of a sudden, like we already could potentially look better on video right now. I might be looking better than I
Yes.
really am. And
Well,
now
you look great.
imagine, oh, thank you. So like, it's got, I got the filters and everything, right?
100%.
Make me
Yes.
look 10 years younger. And now maybe they'll be the true in real life. Like all of a sudden it's like, whoa, or
Hmm.
something. Have you used these? You use like the meta ones?
I tried
Um,
them out, but I haven't used them properly. Do you use it like frequently?
I like it. So I love playing like tennis and pickleball and stuff. And so then it's just like fun. You can start taking videos while
Oh,
you're
that's really
playing,
fun.
and then like later on you can be like, "Oh, that great shot!" And you could like
Oh, that is
replay
pretty
it and send
awesome.
it to your
Yeah.
friends and stuff. It's definitely like, those, or just like if you're in the pool with your kids, or
Mm,
so those types of things. It's just like it's so convenient to
yeah.
take a video or take a photo or something. And then I do like listening. So if you're listening to a
Yes.
podcast or a music, you just kind of put these on, and you don't have to put the earbuds in, and
That's pretty awesome.
you can hear it. So I think that these things have, these meta glasses, these have like more and more people will start to use
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. It feels like the only version of it that I've heard people like, maybe not totally rave, but like strongly recommend.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we'll just see more and more of those types of things. It's a very V1
Yes.
thing. We'll see more and more of them happen over time. Now, how do you assemble your own news diet?
I try and not read a ton of news, to be honest.
Okay,
I,
so you're
I,
reading like more longer form pieces, or okay, if this piece has already been forwarded around a lot, it's 2 months later, then I'll read it. Or
yeah, that feels like a great use of time. I feel like there's an amount of news that I'm happy with, where I sort of like have a rough shape of what's happening, maybe on
yeah,
a given day or a given week. Even a week is totally fine. Um, but for
so like a summary of the week, like The Economist or
Yeah,
something or
exactly.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like The Economist is a great way. You can scan the headlines, maybe
yeah.
read one or two articles, and
Yeah, if you just
uh,
read that every week, you'll be up to speed on everything, right?
yeah, and
Yeah,
also I think up to speed is often very overrated compared
correct. Yeah,
to the amazing long form things that, could have been published 10 years ago, but like is, or 50 years ago, that
Yep.
is actually much more interesting. So yeah, very, very little probably daily news, a lot of fiction, some nonfiction, and then a good amount of long form.
Now, you also published this piece called Monk Mode about your 2025 habits. Can you unpack those a bit for us?
Yeah. I was spending some time thinking, oh, what are some like little experiments I'd like to run on myself and my day to day life this year? And so I basically decided for the next month to try out a few of them. And so, the 10 of them that I outlined are things like, you know, uh, doing fasting during the day, putting my phone on black and white mode, writing
And
fiction
you
every
and
day.
you fast? Is that are you fasting like the whole day, or how are you thinking about that?
No, it's pretty easy. It's like 16 hours
Okay, so it's breakfast,
minimum.
skipping breakfast.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so often it'll end up being like more like 18,
Yeah.
but it's not like you're really crabby or anything like that.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but I've actually just found it like that one super easy and pleasant.
Yep. Yeah. There's something about there was a point in my life where I never felt hungry
Hmm.
ever. Like, I was just never hungry because I was,
Because you
if you
were
have
working?
breakfast, it was just you just have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and just like I was just never.
Oh, I see. I thought it meant you were never hungry and you weren't eating.
Yeah, yeah, no, no. I was just like, I was just always,
Yes.
I always was full. I always,
Yes.
and then I would snack if I saw something or whatever. And like literally, I never felt that thing. You feel that thing in your stomach where I am hungry, and your stomach is
Hmm.
telling you I am hungry. I probably went 3 years one time without ever feeling that one thing, which is so
Hmm.
weird. It's so like almost every human in history until 100 years ago
Yeah.
has felt that like for a very large portion of their life, and then you go like
Yes.
3 years without feeling it at all because we live in this world of abundant calories and abundant opportunity to grab food whenever we want. And I was like, okay, there's something wrong here. Like humans should feel that occasionally, right?
Yes.
And we feel that once a day. That's probably good. It's probably a good thing, or at least a couple times a week or something.
Yeah, it feels like it sort of like weirdly sharpens the mind and
Yeah,
also simplifies my day. Like there's just some amount of faffing about with like, oh, what am I going to have for breakfast or lunch? And if I don't
yeah,
have to worry about it until 3 p.m., then like I got a lot done
totally.
before that point. Uh, do you have any New Year's resolutions?
I make an anti-resolution
Oh, good for you.
every year. So I've done things like eat more donuts, watch more TV, and
Good stuff.
I've definitely done things like read fewer books. So
Mm.
those types of things. This year, my anti-resolution is to curse more.
Mm.
And I've just been very low cursor all my life. And so I say we're keeping this. We're a few weeks into 2025, and I am failing miserably at
Oh
my f
yeah.
bombs have not been coming out at the rate that they're supposed to be, and I'm
Oh,
trying to. It's just so anti my personality, but I'm trying to do it, and hopefully, if you catch up with me in the mid year, I'm just going to be like
you're
cursing like a
gonna be.
sailor. Yeah, yeah, because
That would be a great one of your hand-drawn graphs. I'd like to see your cursing over time.
Yeah, I'm just gonna start. I have to start doing it more often. I am doing now, like playing sports. I like because
Mm,
then it's like it's more fun and people kind of expect it and stuff. But
yes.
in the business context, or like and definitely around my kids, I have not yet been doing the cursing, but I plan to do it more. It just hasn't happened yet.
Okay. Well, I look forward to checking in on that.
Two more questions before you leave that we ask
Yeah.
everybody. One is, what is a conspiracy theory that you believe?
Okay. Now I'm worried that it's going to be you're going to say, oh, everyone believes that, but uh, my conspiracy theory is probably that like the magnitude and significance of spying in Silicon Valley and venture in particular is like probably way higher than we anticipate.
So what do you mean
Um,
by spying? Like foreign countries or?
yeah. I
Okay.
think there's probably like every once in a while you'll see a news story pop up about it. Like I think was it Hone Capital had sort of an FBI probe happening recently, but it's so clearly like an essential strategic asset that in general, Silicon Valley in general so much of it runs on like these personal relationships and
Yeah.
stuff like that. I'd be shocked if there aren't significant escapades occurring from foreign governments. And if I was a foreign government minded to try and do this, I would be like certainly trying to prop up managers and get young tech workers in at all these companies. You hear
Well,
about it more in the
certainly, I mean, you
company
certainly like
context.
companies like big tech companies
Yeah,
have actual spies of every nationality, including even friendly governments. They got French, Israel, right?
yeah,
They'll have friendly
totally.
governments, maybe even UK in there, and certainly they'll have Russia, Iranian, Chinese.
Hmm.
You'll have these other kind of so every company has those working, whether
Yes.
it's Google or Apple or whatever. But you're saying venture capital firms will have actual spies, or will they have more like pseudo? Okay, hey, like the spy meets that person, they kind of give information without even knowing that person's a spy or something like that. Or
I think there's probably flavors of both, if I had to
yeah,
guess. Like, I think there's been plenty of capital from foreign governments that has made its way into
that's right.
Silicon Valley funds
Yeah.
over the years. Wouldn't
And some of
surprise
it could
me
come through intermediaries. You may not even know exactly where it's from.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of that is either like explicitly part of some kind of operative, or if it's sort of like these people are being maneuvered in ways that they don't fully appreciate, and
Yeah.
sharing information that gets utilized. So yeah, that's something that I always feel a bit crazy for believing, but I do genuinely think so.
Yeah. I don't even think that's a conspiracy theory. I think that's
Oh man,
almost certainly true. And I would say almost everyone I know believes it. Like
really?
it's, yeah, I would think so. I mean, it's just, now again, the venture capital one I haven't heard of before. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought, but
Mm.
certainly spies that are riddled in all these different tech companies.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
totally. You expect it at a Google or
Yeah.
anyone of that magnitude.
Yeah, and even like a lot of them are even like customer support, or you
Mm.
have like because a
Oh
lot of them
yeah,
have
that makes
different.
sense.
You have if I want to look up, like a lot of them will have
100%.
opportunities. Let's say inside you're inside X, and you could look up somebody's pro. That person will have like privileges to go. So you don't even
Mm.
need a super high level person. Okay,
Hmm.
go look this up for me, and they'll go look it up on the side, and so that type of thing. And even I think at one point the government of Saudi Arabia was accused of doing that in Twitter, and
Mm.
there's been a bunch. So
Yeah, yeah, of
I
course.
mean, if you were a government, why would you not do that? Like it would just be
100%. It just
crazy not to do that, even if you're friendly to the U.S. It's just so you want to be able to get access to these things that you don't normally have access to, and you want to. There's a dissident in your country or something, you want to go find out more about that particular person. Maybe you want to see their IP address or some other
yeah,
type of thing.
or get some sort of compromat depending on the company
Correct.
or
Yeah, or
whatever it is.
compromat.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right, it's super interesting. Okay, last question we ask all of our guests: what conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
I mean, I think a piece of conventional wisdom in Silicon Valley is that I think maybe it's a John Doerr quote as like, ideas aren't valuable, execution is sort of everything,
Uh,
and I definitely don't believe that. I mean, I feel
oh,
like
okay, this is good. Okay,
I, f-
yeah,
I, I f- I feel like ideas are wildly underrated a lot of the time by that quote.
yeah,
Obviously you need application to build a great company, but a truly novel idea is like, one of the rarest things in the world.
that's so
And
true.
and
It's not
and is
every once in a while you hear a company that's doing something, they tell you about the idea, and you're like, first of all, sometimes it sounds so simple. You're like, I can't believe I didn't think about it. Like it's so obvious after they told it to you, and you're like, oh my god, but it's so brilliant. And
yes,
yeah, I feel like everyone you hear that not pretty often actually. You'd be like, oh my god, that's so obvious, so smart, and then you kick yourself like, why didn't I think of that? Like I've been in this industry for X 30 years. I've never even thought about this thing. So yeah,
yeah.
maybe you're right. I am the I think I would have disagreed with you if you just said that, but like that is. But now I think you might be convincing me on this
Oh,
one.
good.
Yeah.
I there was some snippet that I saw the other day where it was like uh, a screenshot someone shared of messages when Mark Zuckerberg was like 20 or something between him and a friend. And he says something like, there are really only about 6 people in the world who have good ideas. And, I don't quite agree with that, but I do think that it is like extremely rare. And very underappreciated. And a good idea is not like, hey, let's do this exact company, but 1% different. It's like, when you feel it, as you say, you sort of like have that like, oh, that's an incredible thought.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is awesome. Thank you, Mario Gabriele, for joining us on World of DaaS. I follow you at Mario Gabriele on X. I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you there. This has been a ton of fun, super interesting.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to World of DaaS wherever you consume your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and more. And please help us get discovered by leaving a review. And check out worldofdaas.com. That's worldofdaas, DAAS.com. And of course, connect with me on Twitter at Auren. That's AUREN. Would absolutely love to hear from you.